Welcome. It's now 9 o'clock, and we are very, very fortunate to have the famous Dottie Pepper on the Q&A with Kay on Friday mornings. And there's a reason that she could make it today. We're very lucky to have you today. Yes, but it's just great. But before we can begin, let me just tell you a little bit about Dottie, and I could go on and on. I have pages here that I could read. But Dottie began her career as a young junior golfer with a lot of big wins in the home state of New York, which is, now she lives in Saratoga Springs, which isn't very far from where I am right now. In 1981, you won the state amateur. In 81 and 83, she won also the New York State junior amateur titles. In 1984, which I think this is a big one, you were the low amateur in the U.S. Women's Open, which is a very big deal. I think that was in Seattle. Was that Seattle? No.
It was actually in Massachusetts at Salem.
Oh, Salem. Oh, Salem Country Club. Yeah. Great. Okay. I was wrong on that one. Okay. Then you attended the college. You went to Furman University, where you acquired 5 collegiate victories. You were named All-American 3 times. Then joining the LPGA Tour in 1988, 17 career victories with 2 majors, and both of them in the Nabisco Dinah Shore, which I think will bring up an interesting thing of how you missed it as an amateur. You played on 6 Solheim Cup times. You were named assistant captain by McMahon, I believe. And then in 2004, due to some injuries, you retired. Starting her second career in 2005 as a golf commentator then for NBC and the Golf Channel. You currently are the lead walking reporter for CBS and does just a great, outstanding job. And we, in our Q&As, we talk about you all the time because someone's always going, Dottie, what's the lie look like? So Dottie's not only a true champion, she's one of the best broadcasters, and now currently an author also with her new book, which we're going to talk a lot about today, Letters to a Future Champion, My Time with Mr. Pulver. So it's please welcome my friend, Dottie Pepper, and it's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so everyone's clapping.
Yeah, this is so cute. All these muted claps. That's great.
So tell us exactly why you can be here with us today. This was great when I texted you if you'd like to do this. And this was an open day in your calendar.
It is an open day in my calendar. And so many people were surprised last night when I showed up for the Saratoga High Sports Award. They said, well, why aren't you in California? I said, not my network. So it's NBC that has the US Open, NBC Golf Channel, and Peacock, and whatever platforms they're on this week. So this is an off week where Kay mentioned where I started at Golf Channel and NBC. This would have been a full tilt week without being able to come up for air. But instead, now with CBS, I've just finished 10 weeks in a row on the road. I did get to come home most of the time in between, but 10 straight weekends. This is my first Friday off since Good Friday. So imagine go back to the end of March, and I'm just being a normal person, yard and the dog and watching golf behind my eyelids yesterday afternoon, I must admit, for a couple of hours, but I'm actually able to watch golf this weekend.
As opposed to having to talk about it and to walk and all that equipment on you and
right.
Things like that. You do just a great job. We talk about it all the time on your comments and your insights when you are a commentator. But can I start out with a little bit about this book?
This project?
This is a major product. This is a fascinating book, and I've gone cover to cover on it. I haven't read every single letter that's in it, but can you tell me a little bit about the project and tell our viewers here today a little bit about Mr. Pulver, Letters to a Future Champion, My Time with Mr. Pulver?
So I guess the question is, who is Mr. Pulver first?
Correct.
And Mr. Pulver was my beloved PGA professional, and I started with him after he retired from doing everything imaginable in the world of golf and literally in the world as a World War I veteran. So he left Saratoga Springs as barely an 18-year-old and was shipped overseas, fought alongside the Brits in World War I, came back injured, and was a cub reporter at the Saratogian. and was tasked with teaching people about a book came to the editor and was tasked with people, you know about golf, you were a caddy. You tell me how I explain this people, this game, this everybody to our readers. And he got so entrenched in the game of golf that he ended up becoming a professional club maker, agronomist, architect, you name it, because PGA professionals did everything at that time, and he did everything. Teaching, playing, taking down the national PGA champion at the height of his prowess, right here in the New York Open, when he beat Tom Creevy by a resounding margin. So he never talked about his playing career. He never really talked about all the great things he did in the game, including being a founding member of New York State, the Northeastern New York PGA section. And as a retiree, I reached out to his daughter, Madeline, who I knew, who's now 86 and was a very big part of this book, but decided that I needed to pay homage to my teacher, who the basis of the letters were letters that he wrote to me after every lesson. And then many times, more often than that, associated with a reading project, or he had clipped things out of a variety of magazines from literally across the world. He was an avid reader, wanted to continue educating himself within the game, within sports, within philosophy. He mentioned he got it all in there. And I kept every one of those letters going back to 1980. Thinking, well, this is my treasure trove, and it's a gift from him to me that just keeps on giving. And then shortly after we were married, I showed my husband this notebook of letters, and he said, you have a book in here. And I said, yeah, sure. You're the historian. You've done high level writing. I have not. So I, just sort of put that in the back of my mind. And then happened March of 2020. Now, what am I going to do when, the lockdowns were supposed to be 2 weeks, but they turned in obviously to a lot longer than that. How am I going to make myself productive through this time? Am I not going to just shut things down? And to me, it seemed like the perfect time to really dive into this project. So what do I have? I have these letters, and I have other things that the family has left me, including parts of his golf library when he passed in 1986. And I also had a really ragtag folder full of things that were forbidden materials from Mr. Pulver. And those were, sorry, Kay, but instructions from other PGA professionals. He didn't want me reading. He didn't want me getting too technical. He didn't want me getting off a track where he knew that I would best learn. And it wasn't like he was putting me on an island. He wanted to infuse me with the instruction and manner of learning that he knew where I would thrive. So I thought, well, after 35 years, I guess it's okay to open this beat up folder. And it was exactly what I thought was going to be in it. It was articles torn out of so many magazines going back to 1966. I put them all in chronological order. I started to, until my knees were knocked out from underneath me, because in all of those clippings and his notes and margins and underlinings and highlightings were every letter I wrote to him. So you can imagine the shortage of Kleenex in my house that afternoon. I knew what he meant to me, but I didn't know the reverse course. So then this became, all right, I have to do this, because this is not a one-way conversation anymore. It's not just the letters that I received from him. This became a much bigger, more in-depth process, and progress needed to be made. So here we are. It took about 10 and a half months from that afternoon until I had books in hand. And thankfully, to the support of so many people, we've gone through the first printing of the hardback, which is 208 pages indexed. I did the index. Talk about a new learning experience and adding to your skill set. I wrote every word, and we're in the process of reprinting, and I'm going to be able to get it back in paperback form this time because of the volume that we're able to order. So it's been it's been a personal success. I think it's been a professional success from a teaching standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from youth sports to a personal journey. And, to be able to hit the reprint button has been an amazing blessing. So too many words, but here we are.
No, that's great. I can see that it's we still need the box of Kleenex this morning because it just touches your heart. And when you've been that close to somebody, and I know that you talk about it, that he had 3 children, but you were the 4th.
Correct. Yes, really, I was.
Which is, it's amazing because we've all had mentors and teachers in our golf life. I've had a few, but sometimes you just get really close to somebody. And you also said that he never charged you for a lesson.
No, never charged me for a lesson.
But you also talk about him as it wasn't just about golf. When you start to read all of this, it's all about the life skills and about determination. And there's, I think, even let me get this. I know this is one of the things that Eloise said, and you said in the book, it takes discipline to have fun. That discipline is having practice to the point of being automatic. Where you can go to the flow and play with what you got, play with what you got for that day. But her question was always, when did you realize that in the course of your adventures with them? And did you always have fun?
I would say I had fun in my own way. Fun for me was the upward climb, trying to get as close to perfect in an imperfect game as you can. That was, and still continues to be, fun. I still believe you can have a perfect golf telecast, and I have yet to be part of one, but we've come really close. So I guess that never goes away. But he was really big on education, first of all, because I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year school and get a degree, knowing what his children had benefited from their education, and all of them had advanced degrees. But it was also about balance and making work being the game for so many was my job, making that work fun. And when it's not fun, to give yourself the license to take a break, to get away from it. And often people would say that that's the time you need to dig in, but that's the time for him. He goes, go swim with your pals in the pool and get on your bike and do those things that kids do. And he was totally right, because the fun is not there. So take a little break until that returns. The joy in doing it returns.
Well, I saw in some of the letters too that you had a few disappointments, and then he would write you the letter and just say that. Take a break, get away from it until you only play when you really wanted the desire to win.
Yeah.
Which was amazing.
I would say in today's world, yes, he would have been a PGA professional, but you also could have put life coach behind him as a title, because it really was a lot of that. So, and talk a little bit about when you went to college and you started to kind of get off track from his teaching a little bit. And you kind of got, well, I'll say, overloaded with a lot of helpful Harrys, as we call them, because we talk about the helpful Harrys, or helpful Harriets maybe too. that too. And the helpful video that wasn't always so helpful because we never used that. And in college we had access to it. So it was a great word, an overload of well-intentioned input, and I always came back to what was in this book, and I'd write to him saying, I did it again. I've listened to somebody ask me literally, where are your eyebrows? What are your facial muscles doing when you're standing over? I don't know. I'm like, that talk about overload. That was sometimes really painful. And as he continued to age, you could see in the letters as he started to struggle just physically with his fingers on his real manual typewriter board, he was determined to get through and get the message out to me that you need to just continue to be doggedly patient. I mean, talk about almost an oxymoron, but really committed to keeping things simple and doing things that you can build blocks from. And he was always big about the foundation. So I had to be reminded to keep going back to his foundation.
Yeah, we can get too overloaded. I mean, and today it's even worse with all the video tips and everything. And we talk about people are building swings like little Post-it notes stuck to them.
Great point.
Mm-hmm. But what were some of the sessions like with him? When you went, as a junior, because you worked with him a lot as a junior, and he was retired at the time too.
Yeah, he was 81 when we started working together. I was 15. So there's a little bit of an age gap there. And he was always there before I was. He was ready to go with a plan. He always had a notepad in his hand. So he was scratching things out that became, I think, the basis for a lot of those letters. But they were always on point. And I wouldn't say they were lighthearted. I wouldn't say they were fun, but they were how he knew I would learn best. And there was structure to them. And there were things that I just always went back to. So for example, we always started, hitting short shots and never over hitting a first shot. You warm up into the routine as you would do as you were going out to play a round of golf, whether it was casual or competitive. And we always vary targets. And I still watch players on the range today. And some of them are really good about moving targets around when they're warming up for a competitive round. Patrick Cantlay is one of those kids that is constantly moving, constantly looking for a new target, looking for a new shot through a warm up to go out even onto a competitive round. And I love that because that was one of the things that he really stressed, because no matter where, you don't want to get entrenched into a target or come up with a swing that's going to get the ball there. You want to swing your swing at a target. And the wind is going to change, or it's going to be hard blowing out of left to right. So he wanted you to be able to move things around so you didn't get stuck in a practice trench. So those were a lot of the things, but we were constantly looking at equipment, where to shave off shots. We'd go out to the back bunker at the driving range and hit not just the usual bunker shot with a sand wedge. You'd have me in there with an 8-iron. And so he tried to keep it creative too. So you weren't just in that practice trench.
Do you think that we talk about this often, that competitive, because you watch a lot of players now on the driving range, that there's a difference between when you're warming up for a tournament and the difference of practicing or changing something in your swing or doing something like that?
I think there's a huge difference.
Because if people just see people at a tournament, they just see the professionals warming up, but that's not how we practice. So that's not how we change. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Most all the stuff you see is exactly what Kay said. It's a warm up. It's not, this is great. You talk about when play has been suspended on the PGA Tour, there was a great line uttered by one of the officials when they were trying to get back on, it was last year in Boston when we barely made it to the Sunday finish. And they threw the guys out there with, I think, 15 minutes on the range and then transport timeout. There were only 4 or 5 groups left on the golf course. And he said, this is not a practice session. This is a warm up. So there's a time element difference, but there's also just the length of what you're trying to accomplish. When I was playing, I never was trying to rebuild the golf swing on site. That was all done at home, or even new clubs. Didn't have the launch monitors, the technology that's there. So maybe you can change clubs easier today, or just switch something out of your bag that you already know is, well, the 7-wood's not really good in play this week. I'm going to take the 3-iron in, which is 3-iron out, which is something like a Louis Oosthuizen does. That's pretty easy because they know they're perfect matches. They're not really club changes, they're club switches. But you can make club changes easier now because of the technology that's available out there with the launch monitors, with everything that, soup to nuts. They're all players have them because they're write-offs. They travel with them. So there's an ability to do that. But all the really hardcore work, the changes to a golf swing, the refining is done away from the site. It's all done. And so that when you arrive there, it is just a warm up, not a practice session.
It's kind of interesting because I used to say that I used to carry 16, 17 clubs, and people say we can't do that. but because of the particular golf course, I knew that maybe I would take, at that time, it took my 2-iron out and kept my 1-iron at that time. But you had changed it, and we didn't have as many wedges then. The wedges have obviously changed, but he was also big. You guys, he had his shed, I think, in the back that it was, you said something about it was 80% smaller than Arnold's.
Oh, yes. It was a tiny little shed. It was maybe the width of shoulder to shoulder, maybe 3 people. It was a tiny little work shed, and tiny little door, but that was his artist studio. If I could put more than just a golf shop, more than just a tinker space, it was an artist studio for him, because he really did, even into his 80s, stay up in touch with everything that was changing in the game, whether it was graphite shafts really becoming much more efficient, lightweight steel for women was really important. And he, moved me through the A shaft to a regular R300. So he was up on all of that, but that was where his old hickories, which I have all over my office here, found some that his family gave me, some that even came from garage sales that my grandmother's friends had given her, because your granddaughter needs to have these. But even those hand stamped forgings that he had out back were still there. And so he took then and married it with now. But it was a magical little space out behind a tree in the back corner of the yard.
I think it
still stands. It's still there.
Really?
Yeah. The people who bought the house, it is still there, and it's been kept up. It's really, really special.
Let me go back even a little bit further and talk a little bit about your father, who was a great baseball player, and how you had to be conservative or pick your schedule for your tournaments. A lot of people don't know about that. I mean, at the time, like even when I was playing, people would say, well, who was on your team? I'd go, me, myself, and I.
Correct.
Who did your schedule? Who did this? So when you were a junior, though, talk a little bit about your family and the Pulvers.
Sure. My dad played Major League Baseball in the late 60s. And as people who know baseball know that there wasn't a whole lot of money in that, no matter how long you stayed in the game. So when he left the game in the early 70s, I was just over 5 years old. My sister had just been born. He's starting a new business, and there wasn't a whole lot of money. And now all of a sudden he's got this 13, 14-year-old prodigy. I guess you could call it a prodigy, that is starting to play okay and wants, I can't just stay around here. I got to go play on these junior tournaments that all these other kids are playing in that I'm hearing about. Well, there wasn't the money to do that. So the rule was, if I could drive, I could play. And that continued all the way into college, frankly. I didn't play in the Eastern Amateur until I could drive back from school through Maryland, getting back to home. And it just happened to be that the Eastern Amateur was on. So I stayed with a family, came up with enough money by working odd jobs in between tournaments, worked in my family's ski shop. I played piano for some weddings. I mean, I was a little bit creative about how I got money to play golf tournaments, but you had to be. And I think that it really resonated with me that when I went to a tournament, it really mattered, because I worked hard just to be able to play, to have the money to go to that tournament. And my parents had done the same. So it wasn't a whole lot of money, but there was emphasis reinforced through Mr. Pulver. I don't think if my parents had a lot of cash, he would have had any different philosophy about how to bring me up anyway in the game, because he dug around and we thought about how to best play the amount of tournaments, learn how to win big, learn how to win with your bad game, with your good game, whether it was a junior club championship or playing in the Northeastern Women's Golf Association or playing in the odd AJGA event that came to this area. We used to have one at Stratton Mountain. That was huge for me because it was a more national audience, and it was an hour and a half from home. So those are the sort of events that I could play in, and it made sense. And I look back on it, I see it, because there are kids that I played against, even into college, that no longer play the game. They're not around the game. They don't like the game, because it was just go do this. We're going to put you on a plane and just get out of here, go play golf. And it was never that way. It was really well thought out. I wouldn't say overthought, but it was well thought out, and it was in building block steps of how do you make a champion? How do you get that champion to be in the game for a lifetime? Because it's such a fine line. If you don't love it, you're going to find a reason not to do it.
Well, you do see that in a lot of kids today. You know, sometimes they're burnt out before they hardly get to college. And you also talk about that he was your coach on many skills, life skills. When you really read the book, it's like, you do need a tissue with you. But you then also talk about that you get to college, and I've had this with several of my players, and then all of a sudden the college coaches kind of get in the mix,
Yes.
Which is difficult, I think. And I've got some parents that have a hard time with what to do with that, where to go with that.
Yep. There's a balance, and I do think it's gotten a little bit easier now, because you can still make that connection with your player when they're under a coach. And that coach is, they've brought these players in, they've recruited them, they've got them into school with the expectation that there are going to be certain goals that are achieved, whatever division golf they're playing, that they're ultimately we're trying to win a national championship, aren't we? So there's pressure, and there's fundraising, and there's boosters, and there's all sorts of things involved from the coach's standpoint. So they're trying to assemble the best team they can to make their goals become achievable. And then you have these other elements of parents and teachers that they've come in with. And I think it does need a balance, because they have to have the best team put together. They have to have the balance within that team, and then they still have to be respectful of the players and their coaches. And I think Alan Bratton has done an amazing job of that at Oklahoma State, because there's nobody that just kind of strolls into Oklahoma State without having great teaching behind them, even to get eyeballs on them to be recruited. So there's that balance that has to be struck, and I think it's a respectful balance. There's a conversation that happens between the college coach and somebody like you, Kay. I mean, how do we make this work? Because you know your student longer than they have, but now you're turning them essentially over to somebody who has another set of goals, and it's not just about that person; it's about the entire team.
You're right. It's about the entire team. So it really has to be I think there has to be a stronger communication with good coaches and good teachers, because it's still the kid. They're still kids. We all think we knew it all when we went to college. We were still kids.
And you're not sending them to college just to play golf.
Right.
You're sending them to become a more complete person, because as we know, once you get out of college, the opportunities, whether you're going to play professionally, whether you're going to teach professionally, whatever you're going to do in the game, the opportunities start to get to the skinny end of the cone. So you have to be a complete person with a plan B. It doesn't always work out. I wanted to be a pilot. I was going to give myself 5 years of muddling through the mini tours. If I didn't make it, I was going to school. I'm out of here.
Yeah, he believed a lot in education, as did my father, and I really do believe. I mean, even talking about him at 81 to, I think he passed away at 87. But I always talk about, like, I'm an education junkie. I just love education, that we always have to learn something. I always learn something from my students. But I also wanted you to talk about, you have this determination about you, that you always were very focused, very on task. But I think he made a great statement. There's super greats with the unyielding desire to win. There's players, there's winners, and there's champions, but then there's super greats. Go. You're on go.
Yes, that was one of my favorite letters, because it did really set apart the difference that the super greats have. They refuse to lose, but at the same time, they're always very curious. I think curiosity is a big part of being a champion, and he was definitely curious. But he knew that there are some people that just refuse to lose. When you look at a guy like Jack Nicklaus, if you look at a Kathy Whitworth, a Tiger Woods, there is an extra element of I will not back down in those people, and that's what makes a super great.
Well, you say that you have it too, because I've watched you play, and it's like, I am going to win, but I can kind of switch gears a little bit here, because One of my all-time favorites is when I was playing competitive was Judy Rankin.
Mhm.
And
Super great, by the way. Super great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Mr. Pulver said something about it's the flattest swing, the most awful. I agree. The most awful grip,
Ever. Yes.
Ever. And she actually had somebody try to change it. And and he talked about her as being very slight and very little, that she didn't have any chance of winning.
No.
But what made her different?
Well, the funny part about that is when I was asked to speak at her Hall of Fame induction party, and I thought, I know exactly the letter I'm going to read. So I pulled out that particular paragraph and I read it at her party, and the howls across the room were just fantastic. She'll never amount to anything. So I think it speaks to, well, let me say this. She probably had the worst grip ever until Paul Isner came along and made Judy Rankin's grip look weak. And he was one of the best bunker players ever. So imagine all of that put together. But Judy had and still has this undying desire to, in a quiet way, be the very best you can possibly be, no matter what she's doing. Whether it's moving into her new house, which she's doing right now, or if it was captaining 2 Solheim Cup teams to victory, one overseas and one domestically, to be the first player to ever make $100,000 in one season on the LPGA tour, to being really the first tour mom. She had Tui out there dragging them all over the country in cars and driving, and it just amazing what she did. And she has that unwavering desire to succeed, and that's that super great thing.
Well, I think she's also the type of person, when you meet her, she has just a quiet, kind way about her too. And I think that's a unique quality. I can remember talking to her once at the Nabisco Dinosaur, and she goes, "Now, why do you think somebody," she was asking me some teaching question or whatever, and it was that curiosity of, I need to know more about that. I can't remember what it was about, but it was always asking questions, being curious.
She's this wonderful blend of Midwest and West Texas, and so there's a kind of just a roll with it Midwest, but there's a tough side of her too, that being in Midland, Texas was not easy, and from a financial standpoint, their background with Yippee being in the oil business and her trying to play, there were lots of roller coasters that they managed to navigate. Yippee being her husband, who passed away about 8 years ago. They were just an amazing couple, and really trailblazers for what she was able to do on the tour, and set a really great template for so many people to follow.
Talk a little bit about you then also being a broadcaster and what you learned from her, because I mean, how did you get into that? I mean, that's a pretty good switch of careers. I mean, you still are with golf, and you get to talk about it now. We don't have to, it's not, is it as much pressure?
It's different pressure, but in many ways it's still the same, because like the Zoom session, everything's being recorded. So she was really a big reason why I got into broadcasting. I remember doing one of those silly season Wendy's 3-Tour Challenge sit downs, kind of the fireside chat that they roll in, as we will now call them bumpers in television. So they roll in a 30-second piece if they're in between holes or there's a gap in the coverage. And one of the questions that she asked of all of us who sat down, when you're done playing, what do you want to do? And I, without hesitation, said, "Judy Rankin, I want your job." And everybody, of course, laughed. And now I got her job. So, but she was a big part of how I was presented into this. I had just won my second major championship, and the U.S. Women's Amateur was coming to Biltmore Forest Golf Club in Asheville, and I was living about an hour away at the time, just on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina. And Judy said to the producer at ESPN at the time, said, "I think you ought to hire her for a week to be a walking reporter. She might be all right at it." And I didn't even know about it. And it was an off week on the LPGA schedule. And I said, "You just did what?" She said, "Yeah, I suggested that they hire you for the week." And I said, "Well, then you're going to have to stay at my house, because I'm going to need all that time in the car to pick your brain about everything that's going on." And that's essentially what I did and how I got involved. And, you know, I asked everything about behind the camera, in front of the camera. And over the course of the next 5 years, as my body started to take a serious downturn, I also had developed a relationship with a spotter at our statistician at NBC. And when I did retire, he told the producer, you ought to give her a try because she's got an opinion. I think she can be pretty concise, and we don't have anybody that's really ready to step into big place in women's golf. And NBC had a lot of women's golf at the time, and they gave me a shot, and they also worked with me a lot on it. But in the back of my mind was always Judy Rankin when she found out I got this gig at NBC, telling me, because I was going to be the third walker on the ground on PGA Tour events, which means you're probably not going to get a chance to share a lot of your information. Say as much as you can in as few words as possible. And that is always in the back of my head, whether now I'm the lead walker at CBS, or if I'm in the booth, or if I'm in that position, not being, or on a group that's just falling apart, as I had last Sunday. There's no reason to be wordy. We're not getting paid by the word. Judy Rankin was spot on. You say as much as you can in as few words as possible. And if you choose your words right, you don't have to say a whole lot.
You make a very good point, because you get sometimes there's a lot of fluff out there.
Yeah.
I'll just, what do they really say? Or somebody saying 6 different things in a sentence that doesn't make any sense. So I obviously do this every Friday morning, and then when I have a lot of students and stuff, we always talk about that's exactly what you do. They like how you're saying, and they like what you're saying. So it's fascinating. And we always do tease about, I talk about, they go, Dottie, because you're the walking, what's the lie look like?
Right.
And I keep telling people that in my lessons, look at the lie first, and that's how you determine the club and the shot. And most amateurs look at the distance. They go get their little stroke, and they pick the club because of the distance. I got hit my 3-wood. It's like, no.
It's the same thing when people approach a putting green. They wait until they get on top and they put their marker down and pick the ball up to start reading the green, when it should be something that you're thinking about and taking all of the big picture, all of the movement in, 100 yards short of the green, 50 yards short of the green. Kind of narrow your focus so you can see, oh, that's a big drainage pattern. I bet most of this green wants to go that way. I'm in that portion of the green. So a great idea is just start taking the view and making it smaller as you get to the ball, not just on top of it. Now what do I do?
You make a great point, and I say that all the time. When you get out of the cart, or whether you're walking up there, start looking at the green. Let your feet tell you something about what's going on. Did we just walk uphill, or did we walk downhill to get to it? So,
that's right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The other thing, and I've heard you speak at some of the, when it was EWGA, LPGA amateurs, and which I think you do so very well, and I think it can be taken hard by everybody, is we were at the US Open, and I was working with Brandy Burton, a good friend of yours at the time. You came walking up behind us, and we chatted for a bit. And what you were doing is, you were a reporter at the time, broadcaster, and you were being prepared. You walked every inch of the golf course, just not leaving it to anybody else, so that when you were going to broadcast, you knew what it was about.
Right.
So you want to talk a little bit about, and I've heard you speak about being prepared, not only about the golf, but about being a broadcaster.
Right. So, I think my first, I had, I'll tell you my backstory to always being prepared was a former broadcaster, when I was still playing, went on the air with a report about me having a herniated disc in my back. And I'd come off a couple of weeks of rehab, hadn't talked to me. It was bad information, and it went out over the air. And I had sponsors calling me saying, are you going to be able to play? Are you still going to be able to meet your obligations for the year? And I said, let that be a lesson that if I ever am in that position, then I'm going to make sure I have confirmed information. And if I have to talk to a coach, if I have to talk to a player, if I have to talk to a parent, I don't care who it is. I'm going to make sure that if it's important information like that, then I'm going to have it factually correct. Well, I start, especially major championships, by putting my foot on the ground and walking every hole and looking at it from every possible. It takes me probably 5 hours to walk the golf course, and I'll I'll go through some groups, and some groups will go through me because I'm just not finished yet. But the golf course is my first responsibility, and because as I'm the course reporter, whether it's at the Masters or if it's at the John Deere Classic, my chief office space is the golf course, and I have to know that, and I have to know how it's played in the past. So I have a lot of information coming into me by people that I have do this for me and pay them, but I get information start flooding into me on Tuesday morning of tournament weeks, and I just start whittling things down, what I know is going to be relevant by the time we get on the air, whether it's Thursday on cable or for the regular network on Saturday. So I have literally piles of paper that go into that, into the process, sometimes into the book on sticky notes, but everything is in that yardage book, so that if it rains, if the wind comes up, if I drop the book, if I fall, it's all still going to be in one neat place. So my yardage book is really, really important, but I also keep all of those notes. I collect articles off the internet. I listen to podcasts. If there's players doing stuff, I've probably read it or listened to it. I pull those articles out of Golf Magazine and Golf Digest that Mr. Pulver pulled out, and I highlight them and I write in the margins, and they go into an annual file. And if they're really good ones, they stay in that file and go to the next year. But I also have every note in all those yardage books that go in for player stats, how the golf course is played, everything I have scanned on my computer into Dropbox by year, by tournament, by round, so I can go back and I can pull any bit of that. So I have now 6 years worth of those sticky notes and of tower notes all in Dropbox, so that I can have them at just 3 clicks away. For example, 2 weeks ago at the Memorial Tournament, I had Colin Morikawa both Saturday and Sunday. I had him on Sunday at Hilton Head, where Stuart Sink had the big lead, but Morikawa was the guy in that second, in the second player in the last group. And I asked him about his dog, and his dog's name. Talk about Rupert, it's Palmer. So after Arnold Palmer, he did Palmer. And then he told me they had just gotten a new puppy. And I said, new puppy? He goes, yeah, Doodle, badly behaved Doodle, name is Koa. So I wrote Koa down. I couldn't remember that morning going to Memorial what that dog's name was, but I went back in Dropbox, and sure enough, there it was on Sunday from Hilton Head. And even if I don't get it on the air, it's a talking point, a little icebreaker between player and announcer if you're just walking down the fairway. So that was right in my back pocket because of my homework. And some people might think that, well, that's gone a little too far. To me, that's a big deal. And it goes to knowing it came from the player, it's been reconfirmed, it's part of not just a golf story, it's part of a life story. And whether or not you get it in or you don't, it's still there.
That's awesome. And it's all those little details that really, really make the difference. And I mean, you can go back to, go ahead.
Another one for this that came up during the PGA Championship was early round coverage, and we were trying to put the pieces of Jordan Spieth's comeback together. When did this really happen? Where did he really hit rock bottom, or what led to the slide? And I remember him saying something about getting mono, and I couldn't remember exactly where it was. So again, I went back to Dropbox, pulled up the article, and it was back at the very end of 2017 going into 18. And then he talked about having a hand injury that really nobody talked about, and he said it made him make some compensations with his grip. So when you talk about mono coming off 2 amazing years and a run through major championships that were only of players that age, rivaled by Nicklaus and Woods, and now we have this guy who's suddenly looking like he's going to fall out of the top 100. Well, now we can put the pieces of the puzzle together, because I have the pieces of the puzzle in my Dropbox, and it all made sense as you went through the timeline. And how he talked about after Torrey Pines, after San Diego this year in January, he hit balls until his hands bled and told his family, you're not going to see much of me. This is what I know I have to do. So having that at my fingertips, that resource, it seems like a lot of work, but there's not one time it hasn't paid off.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got a couple things in the chat. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And this is always a tough one. Do you have any regrets, any disappointments regarding your career and what's happened?
I think you always have playing regrets. Tournaments that you look, I won 17, but I kicked away 12. That sort of thing. I think that's natural, but no, I have zero regrets about where I've landed, how the ebbs and flows of it. And it hasn't been all easy from 2004. Well, I'm going to get into television. Well, I've now done this longer than I did my time playing, and it hasn't been easy. There have been some really low moments and moments where you have so many weeks strung in a row, and you're struggling to manage home and a dog and homework and everything else that goes, because you still got to pay bills at home when you get home. 5 days of regular mail and all that still is like, oh my God. But not easy, but no regrets.
Well, we have, and this comes up often because I get everybody talking about pressure, playing pressure, whether they're a beginning golfer, they're on their first tee, whether you're on the first tee at the Nabisco Diner Shore, whether you're coming up 18, and you've felt pressure. I mean, you've won twice there. You also had to turn down, I think, an invitation when you're an amateur.
I couldn't afford to play.
Because you couldn't go play.
I didn't have the money to get to California and play in the tournament. So I turned it down. So that was after you talk about the Women's Open in '84. That was a game changer for me, because it got me invitations to play at places like the Nabisco Diner Shore, the Moss Creek Invitational, which was another it was kind of like it's almost like the Players Championship. It was the best of the best, and then they saved spots for the best amateurs to come through. But I didn't have the money, so I had to turn it down. So when you get the opportunity to win that major championship twice as a professional, it means a lot.
And you jumped in the pond. I've been in that
only
pond.
once. So somebody could win a trivia question easily on this one, because I won twice, but I only jumped once.
Why didn't you jump the second time?
Because it was actually the first time I didn't jump, because I wanted to play off on 10, and there's no water on 10.
That's right, there isn't. Oh, and I was there when the pond was a mess. I know. So we'll talk a little bit. I know that pond was. They finally have cleaned it up a bit since then, and then they finally got the robe to go around the Dinah robe. How do you handle the pressure, though? I mean, I've been in situations where we're going to win, where what happens inside you?
I think you recognize what's happening and you acknowledge it. So for me, I could feel my carotid artery start to beat kind of heavy, and my hands got cold. My hands got cold and clammy. So I thought, well, this matters, doesn't it? So I slowed down a little bit, made sure I had a dry towel to kind of warm up my hands, and you lived with it. And I think at the back of your mind, you're always saying, this is the position I've worked for to get myself into. This is exactly where I want to be. This is exactly where I should be. And acknowledge it. And then I've paid my dues. I thought a big deal was being prepared. And it's not that I deserve to win, but I'm capable of doing this because I've put in the work to get here. So by the time you acknowledge what's happening with you physically, you come to terms with, this is exactly what I signed up for this. This is what I want to be doing. I want to be under this pressure cooker. And knowing that you've done the preparation, then just go hit that shot that you've already hit a million times in practice.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, whether you're at that level or at the amateur level, because everybody goes through it. I mean, it's recognizing this. I think also in the book, Mr. Pulver also said that he wanted you, or maybe you said it, to slow your mind down, to declutter it, and you just have to not get ahead of yourself. I think he made some great statements too about, which everybody talks about, is the only thing that's really important right now is this particular shot. Play one shot at a time. That's
so true. And what is the outcome of, or the breakdown of the PGA Championship with Mickelson winning? That was the thing he said he was finally able to do that he had not done for months leading in, was be able to declutter his mind, stay on point. If he was having a hard time getting focused, to take a step back. Come on, let's let it go, and then bring it back in. And it gets harder as you get older. I know that. Just being out, and if you get a run of tournaments in a row, it takes effort to really stay on point, to refocus on the voices that are coming in through that headset that I wear. It takes work, but darn, it's worth it.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. You almost sometimes have to physically step back, take that breath, and then allow yourself to recognize the fact that what's going on, and then move forward. But it's hard to keep staying, because people get ahead of themselves. I mean, one of the biggest things out here that people do all the time is they start adding their score up and going, oh, I might break 90 today or something.
No kidding. And now I'm not comfortable, and I'm doing something I've never done before. And yeah, but that's human too.
Right. But I think it's recognizing the fact, and I used to say that I had to practice that mental stuff as much as I had to practice my swing, which makes it hard. So I've got another question in here. It says, what are your plans for the future besides gardening, dogs? I didn't know you played the piano.
I only play now when there's wine in my hand and I'm alone.
Wine, dine, and piano, right?
That's right. What are my plans for the future? Well, I can tell you that I'm in the final year of my current CBS contract, but I was offered an extension last year for another 2 years plus an option. So you're stuck with me for a while there. That will get me close to 60. So then I got to start thinking about, okay, what do I really want to do when I grow up? I don't want to grow up. I'm gonna definitely garden, the dog. I don't see writing another book. I don't have any more letters, so I think I'm gonna pass on that until I'm sure I'll find all sorts of things to do. I still love to ski during the winters, so I love being up here for the whole winter. What really brought me home 12 years ago was the change of seasons. So I don't go south. I love being around here during the winter. Actually, I'm one of those sick people who likes to see snow coming and to shovel it. So I think I'm going to kind of just keep doing me for a while, and then just maybe do more of home me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because we and I have a lot of similar backgrounds. I come from Minnesota, so I like snow too. And my first love was skiing, and your family had, I think your grandparents had
still have a ski shop, and it's now been 80 years. They just celebrated their 80th season right here in Saratoga Springs. And as many of you know, it was a crazy time to try to navigate, and they had their best season ever, but because people wanted to be outside, whether it was cross-country skis, alpine skis, snowshoes, whatever it was an amazing year to be in the ski business in the Northeast.
Yeah, it is kind of funny when you think about the golfers that have come out of the Northeast, because we're so seasonal, and it's a shorter season. And I just will put in a little plug for when you were an amateur up here, and you played in the Futures Golf Tour as an amateur at the age of 19. And it was at the town of Colony, but that's where you met Eloise, and she always talks about that Dottie won. She was an amateur, and she was only 19.
I was. Now I'm gonna buzz out of the picture for just a minute, because this is the trophy I got.
Oh wow!
I couldn't take the money because I was an amateur. My sister caddied for me. I thought the 7 or 8 footer that I hold at the last was for a tie and to go to a playoff, and it ended up being for the win. But this is the trophy. So it's a persimmon head block driver, and it was signed by every player in the field, and I had it sealed. But that was it. So it still sits in my case right there by the Stratton, the LPGA McCalls. So that was at Stratton Mountain, where I won as both a junior and an LPGA professional. So this was kind of like my early time shelf, but yeah, that's it. It was signed by everybody in the field. And
turn that around once so they can see the screws on it, because we were just talking about this the other day and saying, why do people say hit it on the screws? It's because the screws were
those are the screws. They literally were screws there. Yes. Exactly. Sweet spot. No, the screws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 4 of them. Well, tiny.
Yeah, oh, you love that. So anyways, I've got some other things. One of the couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. I just appreciate your time. I know one of your loves is fast cars. So someone says, what kind of fast cars do you have and love?
What do I have? Okay, so I have a juiced up Mini Cooper that's sitting in the garage that I need to drive more than I drive it. But I drive an Audi RS7 that has well over 500 horsepower, and My grandfather, who started the ski shop when he came back from World War II, had an auto body shop in Saratoga Springs. So I can change the oil in my car. I'm a motorhead. So I like fast cars, and I like to keep my cars clean, and I'm just kind of a geek about that sort of stuff.
Okay, that's good. Okay, that's what when you're out there, somebody said, do the fans call you out a lot, or do they talk to you, or
Oh gosh. Yes.
And if you don't want to answer that question, you don't have to. That's
No, they do, and it's starting to be kind of funny because my spotter who's with me running ahead, not running, but he's always half a hole ahead of me getting yardage, and then he stays behind to get the clubs and flashes me a signal from the caddy so I can get the number on the air. It's gotten to be kind of funny because as people have come out, they've got all this energy from being locked up for almost a year and a half. And especially if I go to some places like in South Carolina where I went to school, and I still have a pretty good connection there, and around here we'll get a few in New Jersey. It's got, let's go Dottie. And then of course the knuckleheads in our audio truck pick it up, and they just jack everything up so that Nance and all those guys can listen in, and now they think they're really funny. So anyway, it's very flattering, but it's better when I don't keep my microphone on.
You got to remember that part. Yeah, that's a lesson well learned, isn't it? Well, I know we're coming to a close, but I want you to tell people this is a fabulous book, where they can get this. They can also, when they sign up, they can get it autographed, which is great that you autographed it for Eloise, myself. So we appreciate that. But tell them where they can get this and learn more about it.
So there are a couple of options. First is on my website, dottiepepper.net. And as Kay said, there's everything in there. If you want it autographed to someone, if you want it sent somewhere other than where you are, Shopify is an amazing thing. My gosh, talk about an education in small commerce. Everything's on my website, including, and I'm gonna shameless plug for production company here in town. They produced the 2.5 minute trailer for it. They did an amazing job, and it was a friend of mine from high school that did it. So it's just really cool. It's on the main page of my website. But you can also get it there. I don't have any copies. I'm still waiting for next roll to come off next week, but taking pre-orders for the hardcover. I'll tell you all, it hasn't been released yet, but the paperback is coming out in this next run, and it's amazing. Okay, it's the same paper weight as the hardcover. It's an amazing paperback. It really is great. But it's going to be probably another 10 days before, maybe a little longer before I get hands-on books. The printer got hammered by COVID, unfortunately. But back to that, you can get it at the northshire.com or the brick and mortar store in Saratoga Springs and Manchester. Both have autographed copies. And also the Saratoga Golf and Polo Club has copies in their shop, and at Irondequoit in Rochester. They all took copies on the wholesale program. So if you're in those areas, they all have signed copies, and I'll be back in shipping business hopefully within 10 days.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's a must-read book. It's I don't read it cover to cover. You just have to put it down and take it back. And you did a fabulous job. And the quality, like you said, the paper, it's just the quality is just great.
This was really talk about how COVID has changed things. The designer of the book has done really some of the most amazing photography and design books that are in today's book world. Everything from Augusta National to some of the biggest clubs overseas. And he took on this project because he didn't need to do this project in the middle of COVID when he was trying to really restructure his business. But he took it on because he understood the bond with me and Mr. Pulver, and he jumped in with both feet. He and his other one employee, and they knocked themselves out, and the editor as well. I actually came to know him through Madeline Pulver, one of George's kids, and it's all been done by Zoom. Everything has been done digitally and remotely, and to be able to have the quality of this book happen and be printed in the United States during this crazy time we're living through, somewhat miraculous, really.
That's great. Yeah, it's great. Well, go to dottiepepper.net. I mean, it's fabulous. I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time today and you're spoiling your day off with us. Do you have any final thoughts for all of our amateurs? One thing that would help them out.
Gosh, I'm sure you've heard Kay say this too, but if I could beg and plead with everybody to know exactly how far you hit every club, that would be a huge help. I think it's the simplest way to bring your scores down, because you don't hit every shot on the screws. And it's important just to know how far you hit it in regular circumstances, not downwind, not uphill, not downhill, but just how far you hit it on 0 to 0. And the other thing I think really helps is if you do get yourself in trouble, and that's inevitable. Even the best players in the world find themselves in a position where you have to get yourself out of a position in one swing. Don't complicate the error. So even if it's a difficult bunker shot, don't try to be a hero. Just get it out in one. Just get out of there. And if it means taking the drop to minimize the damage, go ahead and take the drop. But if you can minimize, then I think you're going to have your best scores.
Great. Well, I want to thank you very much. I know we all thank you, and hopefully we can have you back at some time when you're not working on a Friday again. So we'll be watching. So thank you. I got everybody off mute. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Dottie. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Everybody have a great weekend too.